You are listening to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about Propagandhi. On this episode, I am delighted to welcome Louis Posen. Louis Posen is the founder of Hopeless Records. In July of 2025, news broke that Hopeless was acquiring the catalog of Fat Records. I reached out to the label to invite Louis on the podcast, and now that How to Clean Everything and Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes reissues are out, we decided that now was the time to get Louis on to talk about Propagandhi. Thank you so much for listening. Louis Posen, welcome to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about Propagandhi.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
I'm delighted that you're here, and I'm just wanting to kick this off a little bit. If you can just kind of tell the listeners of this particular podcast, fans of Propagandhi, a little bit about you, who you are, and what you do.
My name is Louis. I'm the founder and president of Hopeless Records, and I guess now the caretaker of Fat Records. I grew up here in Los Angeles, California. Big music fan. Got into punk when I saw my first punk show in 1982, which was X at the Reseda Country Club in the San Fernando Valley. Didn't know that I'd ever be in the music industry. No one in my family was. I just stumbled into it because I went to film school and was directing music videos. And my first one was for NoFX for the song Bob on White Trash TV. It's in a Being. Second one was for Guttermouth, and they dared me to put out a 7-inch record for them. And I thought those were pretty cool dares, so I went and bought a book called How to Run an Independent Record Label at my local bookstore when there was local bookstores. And then I called Fat Mike because I had done the NoFX video and, knew he had a label, Fat Records, so asked him and Aaron, his wife at the time, a bunch of questions, about how I should put out this 7-inch. And that was a sort of dare that turned into a hobby when I did a couple other records, one for Schlong, that whole cover of the West Side Story soundtrack called Pump Side Story. But it wasn't until 1995, 2 years later, that I started doing the label full time for lots of different reasons. But one, because I was diagnosed with an eye condition called retinitis pigmentosa, where you slowly lose your eyesight and there's no treatment or cure. So I thought, I love both film and music, and this label thing is going really well, and you need less eyesight to be doing it. So I started doing it full time in 1995. And now here we are 30 plus years later and still doing it. And we're, one of the biggest rock labels in the world, still totally independent. And the craziest thing came around last year where Fat Records was making some changes and wanting to sell the catalog and look for a partner on future releases of artists who have put stuff out on Fat. And I had known Mike and Aaron, my entire adult life. And so luckily they thought we were the ones to be entrusted with this incredible thing that they built.
Fabulous. Yeah, it's such a special thing, and I did follow the story pretty closely when the acquisition was taking place, and to be honest with you, I was just completely happy for you and very happy for the bands as well, because the details that were released publicly were so artist-friendly, and I just got the sense that there was just kind of a clean slate with the catalog for the record for all the label over the last 30 years or so. So congratulations, just in general from me on all of that. It's very cool. So Louis, when this was all taking place, I started seeing you pop up on podcasts and in interviews. And something that continuously popped up that caught my attention, obviously, was that you have mentioned several times, like on Shane Told's Lead Singer Syndrome podcast or the Bespoken podcast, that you were in the studio while Propagandhi was recording How to Clean Everything, and you never really have elaborated on that story in those podcasts, and so I'm just curious if you can tell more detail on that experience and what you remember specifically from that time in the studio when Mike and you and the band were all in the studio together.
Yeah, it was a long time ago, so my recollection could be different than what it actually was, and so like so many people's. But when I think back upon that time, I had done the NoFX video, so I stayed friends with Mike and the guys. He was in LA, uh, working on the Propagandhi record, and we got together, and he said, "Hey, do you want to come by the studio?" So I remember going to West Beach Studios. It was a studio that did a lot of records at that time. I mean, probably the most important recording studio of the kind of early mid '90s in punk rock, especially Southern California stuff. I believe it was co-owned by Epitaph and Donald Cameron, who was the in-house engineer there. Um, and so it was my first time in a recording studio. As I mentioned, family wasn't in the music business, so it was my first experience. I thought it was awesome being able to see, a band in the main room and the glass between the control room and the main room, and how the whole process was happening and how sort of detailed it was. So I remember that, and remember meeting the guys. Feel like, I know what songs were being recorded, but I that probably is made up in my mind too. But it was a unique experience for me, enough to remember it my whole life, because it was my first time in the studio. And then later, of course, this record came out, and it's one of the seminal records of my career. And that, not that we put it out, but that record, the NoFX Longest Line and Lag Ride and Duh, all came out sort of back to back, and that hooked me into this community, this underground punk community, and sort of inspired me to be part of it, and to make it something that I wanted to be part of for a long time.
Nice. You mentioned Donnell Cameron. Donnell Cameron is sort of an enigma for this podcast because I've tracked down Jason Livermore. I've tracked down John Paul Peters. I got some emails from Bill Stevenson. I interviewed Ryan Green, but Donnell Cameron is somebody that I never have been able to track down to have on the podcast. Do you know whatever became of Donnell Cameron? Because I haven't been able to find him.
Yeah, I think Donald is one of the most underrated and least talked about,
Mm-hmm.
important people of this era of punk. Uh, I listened to a lot of the same podcasts you're talking about, and I rarely hear people talk about him. And I just feel like so many of these records are what they are because of him. And even Hopeless. I mean, our first few releases were all recorded at West Beach with Donald. I spent a lot of time with him. What an amazing guy, and what a brilliant artist himself, and how he made these records. I lost touch with him. I believe he moved back to Canada at some point. I don't know if he still lives there. And I was recently talking about him with somebody. It might have been Chris Hanna. And they had said that they had been in touch with him a few years ago, and they were going to try to get me reconnected to him, because I'd love to talk to him, just share stories of the past. But I hope I do find him, and if I do, I will connect him to you, and you should definitely interview him.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about. I love how little connections lead to new connections in the world of podcasting. It is one of my favorite things about this is the word of mouth recommendations. So you just mentioned Chris. Since the acquisition of Fat by Hopeless, what is your relationship like with Propagandhi today? What have you been doing to build this relationship that fans are seeing come out in some new reissues?
Yeah, so our relationship with the band actually goes longer and deeper than just me being in the studio and being a fan, of the early records when they came out. Um, a few more years into Hopeless, we ended up putting out the Weaker Thans records, licensing them from G7. Yeah, and so I dealt with Jord and Chris because they were running G7, and we ended up, working closely on the Weaker Thans, and then we distributed some of their other records. I think International Noise Conspiracy, and I feel like there was another one, and then we I think they were the ones that connect us to Small Man Records. I don't know if you remember them.
Yes, I do.
And we ended up distributing like Moneen and Randy and some other Canadian artists. Um, so yeah, our my relationship goes way back with those guys. So it was not weird or uncomfortable to pick it back up when this bad thing happened. And yeah, so and our team is made up of people who are fans of the band, and so everyone's super excited to be working with them. And so yeah, I've had a few conversations with Chris and some email exchanges, and we're talking about things like anniversaries of the records and reissues and things to do with that, and some of their self-release stuff if they want us to press vinyl on that. And there's a myriad of things we're talking about, but it's just awesome to be back in touch and work out with them.
That is actually incredible because Supporting Cast was a record that they thought they were recording it for Fat Records. Chris has talked about it on his podcast a lot. And then the relationship with Fat and Propagandhi didn't work out, as a lot of people know. And then they did this stuff with Small Man for Supporting Cast. But then Supporting Cast kind of fell off the radar. And it is truly, I'm not even joking with you, my favorite record that I've ever heard in my life. It's my favorite record of all time. And so it's so um sporadically available. So
Yeah.
to hear that those conversations might be taking place for, in my view, the greatest record of all time is pretty exciting. So that's a nice little nugget there. So thanks for letting us know about maybe that in the future. That'd be super cool.
Yeah, well, that's you just mentioned the title we're talking about, and we're very excited about possibly repressing that and making it really nice. And yeah, so hopefully that'll happen.
Yeah, cool. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. But if it does, that's amazing. And I'll just say that my favorite Chris Hanna written song of all time is the title track from that record. I've been, obsessively talking about this band on this podcast for almost 6 years now, and that is the song that I can never seem to topple as my favorite Chris song ever. So what an exciting little tidbit. Thank you so much for letting me know about that. Um, so you recently re-released Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes and How to Clean Everything. Um, how was the band involved in these reissues? What is the label excited about for what you currently have out? Because I've been seeing those pop up in the world. It's very exciting. So what's everybody's conversations like around How to Clean and Today's Empires?
Yeah, so we typically talk to, bands about what they're looking for in a reissue. Do they want to add songs? Do they want to change art? Do they want to just change colors of vinyl? And so those things happen. Some artists are more interested in getting involved in that than others. Christina, who heads our production, is a huge Propagandhi fan. So any excuse for her to communicate with the band is exciting for her. So she's been having those conversations with Chris, and yeah, so ran those reissues by him. Those came up pretty quick because they happened not that far into um, us taking over the catalog, and we wanted to get stuff out that was out of print and what fans have been asking for. But then there's some other stuff coming up where we have more time to work on it, and hopefully we'll be doing things like adding songs or changing art or doing things that the band might be interested in, making it different than the original.
Excellent. So, question. So the stock for Fat had to have been at their office up in San Francisco in the Bay Area. What is the process like for getting existing stock to you? Has that location, that office in San Francisco, continued to operate as they're selling off stock before you guys take control in LA? What's that process like?
I love your interest and level of detail in this. Oh yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, that's a whole, they've got 35 years of stock, right? So yeah, we've been our team's been working with them, and we've been sending some stuff directly to different distributors around the world from San Francisco, and then some stuff here down in Los Angeles. And we're still in that process because it's just an overwhelming amount of stuff.
Mm. Yeah, that's really, really cool. Because San Francisco and LA are not super close to each other. So getting all that existing stock down to where you can actually package it and use it and sell it is it got to be just a monumental endeavor for sure. Um,
It is, and I should give a shout out to Pat and Bart at Fat Records because they've been, a huge part of that process and getting everything organized and even packing stuff up. So big shout out to those guys.
Yeah, I got a question for you about the relationships of bands. We were just talking about you kind of reconnecting with Chris, but I also should say that I want to have Christina on the podcast to talk about being a fan of the band as well. So she is invited. I am saying it publicly. So if she ever hears this, Christina, come on the podcast.
I just talked to her right before I came on with you, and I said I'm coming. Greg's podcast on Propagandhi. So I asked her what should I say. She said how much I love the band. So there.
She's got to come on. She's got to come on. We can talk about it in more detail, and she can pick songs and stuff that are like her her podium top three Propagandhi songs. And we can dig into them. That'd be fun. Okay, so Fat has this really deep catalog. Fat, Honest Don's, long running bands, but there's also long defunct bands. And I'm wondering what the process is like for you and the rest of the staff at Hopeless to kind of get to know the people, the vast amount of people that have been spread out over the years of the label's history. What's it like building relationships with some of the bands that maybe you never came across before?
Yeah, I mean that's part of what comes with this. Luckily, I know a lot of the bands from over the years, especially the early bands. So it's very easy to transition to talk to Strung Out and Less Than Jake and some of the other Lagwagon. Of course, I've known Joey forever and did a directed music video for Lagwagon back in the day. So those were easy. The ones we don't know were things like Bad Cop, which we just released a new record. But yeah, we get to know them the way we get to know hopeless artists, which is just be available and open and talking and learning what their vision is and where we can help support where they want to go. And some of these artists are active like Bad Cop and some are inactive but still want their records to be repressed and a focus on those albums that were important part of the Fat history and the that artist history.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many too. There's like Diesel Boy and Teen Idols and Limp and Bracket and Wizzo and Consumed and Goober Patrol. I mean, there's so many. Have there been any bands that have been long defunct that have gotten in touch, like wanting to be involved, even though they broke up years and years ago?
We're working on one right now with Nurture.
Oh,
And
sweet.
yeah, and we're putting out a reimagined version of their self-titled record that wasn't on Fat. And it was on a major, and they're doing some reunion shows and some other things. So it's awesome to get to work with those guys. So yeah, there's going to be, I'm sure, these coming up. We have the Good Riddance record, which is not a defunct band by any means, but they take their time between records. Yeah, so it's awesome.
Awesome. So we got a couple more Propaganda records. Let's Talk More Rock actually turns 30 years old in 2 months, almost 2 months to the day when we're recording this. I'm working on a anniversary celebration episode of the podcast for the 30th anniversary of that record. And then Potemkin City Limits just turned 21. Is there any uh, you know, secrets that you want to spill about any plans for Less Talk or Potemkin in the future?
I may or may not spill stuff, but I don't actually know what the plan is on Last Talk. I knew the anniversary was this year, so Christina's the best person, but I'm sure she'll want to save some of that for a public launch. But I for the deep fans here, I'm sure she's got something to give away. But I want an awesome record, so excited about the anniversary.
Very cool. Well, something that I want to put in your ear is that on Chris's podcast, which is exclusive on Patreon, a couple years ago, he released a song called Pyroclastic Flow, which was an unfinished song from the Let's Talk More Rock sessions
Okay.
that Ryan Green recorded. And Chris about 2 years ago, recorded vocals for it and released it on his Patreon. So if you guys are looking for a little nugget to do something
Ooh,
special for Less
yeah,
Talk, you got to get Chris's thoughts on his finished version that he
right.
did in like 2022 or 2023 for his Patreon. So scope it out.
Okay.
I think that
That's
you'll like it.
great intel.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sorry, Chris. Sorry. So there's another little thing that came up on this podcast a few years ago involving the band Silverstein. They released a support your local record store 7-inch on Hopeless in 2011, and the B-side contains a Kid Dynamite, American Nightmare, and Propagandhi covers. Do you remember this 7-inch from Silverstein?
I didn't remember it until you just said it, and now I remember it. That's crazy. Wow. I have to look to see if we got a copy of that anywhere.
Man, well, I've got one right here. Billy from Silverstein, he and I met up in Toronto a couple years ago after he was on the podcast, and he gave me a copy of it. So it is really awesome. It's like this green and black flecked vinyl,
Yeah.
and it's got Fuck the Border from Today's Empires as the cover. And he told the whole story about why they covered that as a Canadian band always coming across into the States. And it's really, really cool. So if you can dig up a copy of that, it is pretty awesome. And it's
Yeah.
just a freaking great band too, you know?
Yeah, totally. Wow, that's really cool. Yeah, we did a whole record of covers for Silverstein. Um, but yeah, awesome band, and yeah, it's a pleasure working with them for a long time.
What is so obviously another Canadian band, Propagandhi, Silverstein. What's the situation like for bands right now internationally with regards to the whole tariffs issue and the border issue and the constant bickering between Canadian and U.S. governments at the moment. Obviously, it's all our fault, but what is going on with what you're noticing in the music industry with regards to bands like coming across the border, getting visas, anything like that that you can share?
Yeah, I feel bad. Here's the moment where I have to apologize for our country. We have a lot of, there's a big population. We have a lot of different people here, and it there's a large amount of us that aren't supportive of our leadership and how they're behaving and treating um, people here as well as people abroad. So my apologies to listeners. But yes, it's a discussion we have in the music industry regularly now. Unfortunately, there's a lot of uncertainty. I think that's part of the biggest problem is it changes every day. We are having artists that are crossing the Canadian-U.S. border without problems, and to other places in the world. We have one artist that's been hurt the most. A trans artist who doesn't feel comfortable coming to the United States, and I don't blame him. And so there are definitely some things. I'm also on the board of this organization called A2IM that represents 600 independent U.S. record labels, and it is a discussion that people are having that visas were more challenging, costs were more challenging, and then, of course, just the fear of you know, doing all this work and then not getting into the country or being in the country and getting kicked out or that's just not a great way to touring is already hard enough, to add this sort of uncertainty and fear on top of that is a real bummer. And we're hoping things will change, but artists are still trying their best and want to play for fans. So it's still going on. Um, Still got bands touring, still crossing the border to Canada and back. Um, and I hope that continues because, our community is really based on being together. And it's hard to be together when you can't go to shows.
Yeah. Well, I know that a lot of Propagandhi fans in the US have been making the trek up to their Canadian shows in 2025, and a ton of them have already said they're going to their Canadian shows this summer. in Western Canada as well. So a lot of us are adjusting. Fortunately, I live right on the border in Buffalo, New York, and I'm able to go see any shows up in Ontario pretty easily. So I've been going and spending my tourism dollars up in Canada as often as I can lately. So
Yeah.
I'm very fortunate in that regard that I'm so close to.
Well, here's my nugget, which is we are going to be doing a bunch of things for the Fat 35th anniversary. I know it's more than 35 years, but they're late on everything, so it's very on brand for them. But so we're working on that for mostly the second half of this year, and there'll be some sort of flagship events, if you want to call it that. We're working on two right now, and one I talked to Chris not that long ago. I said, "Are you even interested in knowing about this and having that opportunity?" And he said, "Yes." So I'm going to be getting back to him, and hopefully we could get them out here for one or both of these shows.
Oh man, that would be great. Well, Louis, the fans of the podcast will want to know what your favorite Propagandhi record is before we bring this in for a landing today.
Uh, well, albums are like kids, right? You can't say you got a favorite one. They're just all different. Um, you don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, and that's kind of the truth. Even though I only have one child, so it's easy for me to say she's my favorite child. So, but I don't know. Like I said, How to Clean Everything was such an important album in my life. It's I'd have to put it in my like top 10 albums just because of not just of how great it was and how it made a statement and a unique sound and voice of the time, but yeah, it changed my life really. It's a big part of my the start of my career. So there's that, but also probably makes more sense now lyrically than it did then. I don't know. It's just that and most of their points that they've made are more relevant now. It's a little bit scary.
Yeah, it's terrifying. I've been making a song by song podcast for the last 5.5 years about the band, and we talked about every single song on a full length episode from their 1989 demo all the way up through their DOA cover that they did in 2024, and now we're starting on our At Peace episodes. But one of the most common things that we said on the podcast over the 5 years was, I can't believe that this song is still relevant and getting more relevant by the minute. It's kind of insane how prophetic so many of their songs are. So I'm glad that you appreciate and recognize that as well.
Oh,
Well, Louis Posen, Hopeless Records and caretaker of Fat Records, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and having a chat with me about, um, you know, seeing Propagandhi in the studio. What a formative experience in 1993, and telling me some stories about your work that you do at the labels today, and some stories about what you're doing with Propagandhi. It's awesome to hear from you, and I know the fans of this show and of the band will greatly appreciate your insights. So thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate your time.
thanks for having me.